This video has been brought to you by Data Vinci Analytics Agency. So in this video, we are going to compare between Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch, right? So this is going to be very simple. To be honest, no, it's not going to be very simple. This is going to be a complicated video. Creating this as well was not very easy. So it is going to be a complicated video, and you might need to watch this video multiple times, and you might need to open both Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch as well to watch through this video. Alright, so let's start. Before moving further, I would like to invite you to join our group on Facebook, the Digital Optimization League. This group is dedicated for the digital analytics community, right? And the mission of this group is to solve any questions pertaining to digital analytics and optimization, discover and promote top talent, and share ideas and just create impact for the community. All right, so looking forward to meet you here. So in this video, we are going to discuss what are the similarities between Google Tag Manager and Adobe Analytics, such that if you are familiar with one platform, then you are able to understand the concepts between the other platform as well. In most cases, since Google Tag Manager is a free tool, then more people have familiarity with Tag Manager and less have familiarity with Adobe Launch. But the fundamentals of both the tools are same. So you just need to understand that how you can do the things which you are able to do in Tag Manager in Adobe Launch. Okay. So when we sign into Google Tag Manager, so we have a list of all the accounts that have been mapped with this ID, right? But in most cases with Adobe Launch, you will get the access to a company's account with a company's ID. So as such, there is no common screen where all the accounts are present, but when you will log in with your company ID or corporate ID, then you will see a screen like this, right, where you have a list of properties, and properties in Adobe Launch are same as containers in Google Tag Manager. So like if we look at this one, right, so it has two containers. So this is an account and this has two containers, and similarly these can be called containers in Adobe Launch, and in Adobe Launch we just call them as properties. Okay, so let's move to the next concept. So now when we click on any container, so we have overview, tags, triggers, variables. Now basically the key building blocks of the functions of Tag Manager are these three, which are tags, triggers, and variables. So let's start with variables. So in Adobe Launch there is also a concept of variables, but in Adobe Launch the variables are called data elements. Okay, so just like we have variables in Google Tag Manager, we have data elements in Adobe Launch, right? So the concepts of data elements is similar to Tag Manager. So in Tag Manager, if you want to create a variable, you will click on variables, right, and by default you will have certain out of box variables, and then you can create the different kinds of variables. Like you can create variables based on URL, you can create variables based on page, data layer variable, JavaScript variables, right, and various other constants and things like that. Similarly in Adobe Launch, you have a possibility of creating plenty of variables, right? Now if you want to create any variables based on default extension, then the extension is core, right, and then you can choose a type of variable, whether you want a cookie, custom code, which is like a custom JavaScript DOM attribute, or it's a JavaScript variable, which is like just a data layer variable, it's a local storage, page info, query string parameter, random number, session storage, visitor behavior. So these things are again similar to what you have in Tag Manager. So in Tag Manager you will go to variables, and in Adobe Launch you will go to data elements. Okay, so one of the key differences between Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch is that in Google Tag Manager you have to separately create your tags, right, and triggers. But in Adobe Launch, these two are combined into a single concept, which is called a rule. So here you just click on create a new rule, and so whatever over here is under if, that is your trigger, and whatever over here is under actions, that is essentially the same as tag in Google Tag Manager. Okay, so like here if I click on events, and I can choose that when this particular thing should fire. So I can choose various things like page top or page bottom or click or hover or whatever. So it's more or less same as Google Tag Manager only. So if I select click, then I can specify the CSS selector. I can specify that whether it should fire on all elements. So more or less the fundamentals are same, right? So in Google Tag Manager, there are conditions which are there in the trigger as well. So if I go to triggers and I click on new and I select anything, let's say I select anything, so this one is top, which is like a page view. Okay, and then here is it that it defines that some page views, and then I can put additional filters. In Adobe Launch as well, it's the same thing. Here I will add an event, right? Like it's going to be a page view, click or whatever, and then additional conditions that I want, I can put those over here, right? So Adobe Launch is also, in terms of the fundamental concept, same. Now let's discuss some differences. Okay, so in Google Tag Manager, when you have to create any tag, so if you click on tag, right, then you click on new and you click on tag configuration, then it gives you a list of tags that you can add, right? So it has the feature tags, which are mostly the Google tags. Then there are custom scripts and custom images, and then there are these extra tools that you can create as tags. Okay, in Adobe Launch it works slightly differently. Okay, so in Adobe Launch, if you are installing any kind of tool, any kind of tag, so until and unless it's a custom script or a custom HTML tag for any other tool, what you first need to do is you need to sanction that in extensions. This you even need to do for Adobe Analytics. So even though this is Adobe Launch, but even if you have to install Adobe Analytics, you have to first sanction that using extensions. So how you do that? For this, you first need to go to catalog. Okay, and here you need to look for the tool that you want to install, right? So for example, let's say that you want to install the Facebook pixel. So let's search for Facebook. Okay, so here you first have to install this, right? So now when the extension has been installed, so you can put, I'm just putting a random number over here, so 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, now when the extension has been installed, if you now go to your rules and you click on create new rule, so whatever condition you provide over here, let's say that we want to fire this on all pages, and we select page top, right? And then, as I mentioned earlier, that to fire the actions, that is essentially to configure the tags, you need to click here, and here now you will get the Facebook pixel as well. Then you can select all the actions that are available with this particular extension, right? Like add to wish list or whatever, or if it's a custom event, then you can set the custom event over here, right? So this is the difference between Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch, that in Google Tag Manager there are predefined list of tags that are readily exposed to you when you click on tags, but in Adobe Launch you first need to install them using the extensions. So even if you want to install Adobe Analytics, as I mentioned earlier, so you have to come over here and install that. So here, right now, this particular extension has been installed for you. Then you need to configure the global settings, like in case of Google Tag Manager, you would have your account ID and various other things, right? So similarly, Adobe Analytics has got its own settings. I would not get into too much detail over that in this video, but you will configure your extension over here, and next when you click on your rules and select the particular extension from there, then you can fire whatever tags or triggers you need to fire for Adobe Analytics. So I can understand that it can get a bit confusing, so just a small recap on what we have covered so far, right? So the first thing that we covered is that containers in GTM are equivalent to properties in Adobe Launch. Okay, variables in GTM are equivalent to data elements in Adobe Launch. Then we covered that rules in Adobe Launch include both triggers as well as tags in Google Tag Manager. So in Google Tag Manager, tags are created separately and triggers are created separately, but in Adobe Launch, rule combines both of them. Okay, then accept the custom JavaScript based tags or custom HTML based tags, right? I'm explicitly mentioning this, that accept the custom JavaScript based tags or custom HTML based tags. If you want to install any other tags, then you first need to install the extensions in Adobe Launch to create their respective rules, right? And where do we get the extensions? There is an extension tab, and in catalog we can look for all the available extensions, and then we have to install them and configure them. Okay, so now let's proceed ahead with the other similarities and differences between Adobe Launch and Google Tag Manager. Now another difference, okay, in Google Tag Manager, if you create a trigger, so for example, if I open any trigger over here, right, so it will show you that what are the various tags that have been associated with this particular trigger. Not only that, in Google Tag Manager you can associate the same trigger to multiple tags, right? This is a good point about Google Tag Manager, that you get to see that a particular trigger has been used across which all tags, right? Now in Adobe Launch as such, there is no feature like that. Okay, so if you create a rule, so let me create a rule. So you will have to create different rules for and each rule and action, so each trigger, so let's consider this part as a trigger and this part as a tag, so each rule and tag combination is unique. But the difference over here is that if you create a trigger, right, so I'm just creating a simple trigger where I want to do something every time the page loads, right? So I'm just creating this simple trigger that do something whenever the page loads. Now here the difference is that I can create multiple tags. So let's say this is a simple JavaScript tag which can be used for custom HTML. So I say just that console.log, this is done. I'm just doing something very random over here. So this is just a simple JavaScript tag. Okay, now so this tag came over here. Now I can add another tag. So here let's say I can add a Facebook pixel. Okay, now action can be add to wish list event. Just doing something random, that test 100 USD. Okay, so here you can keep on adding tags or keep on adding actions to the same trigger. So in Adobe Launch you can use one trigger and associate multiple tags, whereas in Google Tag Manager you can create a trigger and then associate multiple tags to that trigger. So it's entirely your preference which one do you like. Both methods are in general convenient and easy to use as you understand how to do this. Here also for we can set the order, like this tag should fire first, then this tag should fire, then this tag should fire, then something else should happen. So now let me take an example of Google Tag Manager for any trigger. Okay, so let's take this one. Okay, now here we know that this particular trigger has been used with this tag. Okay, so here if we edit it and we go to advanced settings, then we can set the tag firing priority, right? So if you set it to something like 1000, right, so this tag would fire the earliest. So this is how you can control the order, but in Adobe Launch you can control the order from here itself if there is a certain page load tag or tags which can be associated with the same trigger, right? So that's another difference between Adobe Launch and Google Tag Manager. I hope I'm able to explain, but if you have any doubts, just put them in the comment section. So here we cover another difference, right? That in GTM, one trigger can be mapped to multiple tags, but in Adobe Launch, one rule can have multiple actions within it with the same trigger in a way. And in GTM, you set the order of each tag separately using advanced settings in the tags, while in Adobe Launch, you can sequence the actions in the same rule. Right, so let's move further. Now the next item is something where Google Tag Manager, according to my personal preference, has a clear edge, which is the debugger, right? So in Google Tag Manager you clearly have the option to preview very easily. So you just click on preview, it will open the debugger and it will open the site, and you can just see what all is happening on the site based on the various actions that you're taking on the site, right? So most of you might be familiar with this thing, that when you go to the preview mode of GTM, and now whatever interactions you do, right? So the GTM debugger would get updated, and then you can clearly see that what are the tags that are getting fired, what are the values of the various variables, what is happening in the data layer, any errors are coming or not, how is the data layer getting updated, right? So this is a very good feature, and I personally love it. But something like this does not exist as such in Adobe Launch. Something like this is not readily available. So if you go to Adobe Launch, as such, you will not see any option to directly enter the preview mode over here, right? So there are various other ways to do that, but as such, there is no way to enter the preview mode, right? So you can definitely debug and you can definitely preview what you have created in your rules, data elements and extension before publishing them to the prod environment. But as such, over here in the interface of Adobe Launch, you will not see any option, any button to directly enter the preview mode and immediately start seeing what's going on. Okay, so that brings us to our next difference. So moving forward with the next difference, so in Google Tag Manager, to install it, so you might be aware how to do that. So go to admin, go to install Google Tag Manager, and then you will see these two codes, right? So this one is the one that goes into the head tag, this one is the one that goes to the body tag. This is essentially a no script tag. That means if there is a website which is being opened in a browser where JavaScript has been disabled, so then the no script tag is usually used as a fallback. Okay, here the structure of the code is essentially a function. So this code is creating a new script tag on the page, and this code also tries to make that script tag as a first script tag of the entire page. All right, so this one goes into the head, this one goes into the body. Now as such, this one will install a particular container, right? This is not giving you the options to install it separately on prod and separately on dev, separately on UAT or any other environment that you have. But the case in Adobe Launch is slightly different. Okay, so in Adobe Launch, when you go to a property and then to install, you have to go to environments. Okay, and in environments you can create as many environments that you want, like dev, prod, UAT, dev 1, dev 2, anything that you want to create. You can just click on add environment and do that. And then what is the case over here is that you will install the code separately for each of the environments. So on your production side, to install the code, you will get the code from here, right? For your staging, you will get the code from here. For your other environments, anything that you have named it, you'll get the codes from here, right? So this is different in case of Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch. And also if you look at the structure of this particular code, so it is just a simple script tag. As such, it is not having any functions or anything like that. It is just a simple script tag, and the script tag holds the location of your the analytics or tag manager library. So whatever you create in the tag manager, all those functionalities are getting located in this particular location, right? So that is what this particular tag is going to do, right? And the way you debug Adobe Launch is very much related to this particular feature. So let's discuss that as well in some time. So just a recap, there are no separate installation tags within a container for different sites like prod or dev in Google Tag Manager, but there are separate tags within a property in Adobe Launch for different environments. Okay, there are two installation scripts in GTM, one that goes in the head, one that goes in the body. The head is a normal script, the body one is a no script. But in Adobe Launch, there is just one script tag. Okay, both the tags, be it the one that is used to install Google Tag Manager or the one that is used to install Adobe Launch, they both need to be put in the head tag. So that's a common thing between them. Now let's discuss how to debug or how to preview in Adobe Launch. Okay, so before installing anything on the prod environment, if you want to check it in the dev environment or something like that, then how you can do that. Okay, so it is not directly possible in Adobe Launch. So there, in general, assumption is that your UAT or prod should be such that there is not much difference between them. And whatever you are going to test in your UAT site, if you are convinced that it's working fine, so you can go ahead and publish that. And if it's working fine in UAT, so it will work fine in prod as well. So instead of opening your prod site, you will open the URL of a UAT site and test it over here. And if you're convinced, then you will publish the changes. Okay, it is not very convenient to do that. Okay, so ideal scenario should be that there is no difference between UAT and prod, but in general there can be differences. So how can you do that? So for that, there is a separate extension that has been created by Search Discovery. Search Discovery is also the company that created Satellite, which was a previous DTM on which the Adobe Launch platform is also built. I'm not sure whether they have contributed to the development of Adobe Launch or not, but they were the company that created the previous Dynamic Tag Manager, and Adobe Launch is an upgrade of the Dynamic Tag Manager. Okay, so the extension is called Launch Switch. You can find it from the App Store in Google Chrome. And how to use this, what you need to do first is, once you have installed the Launch Switch, then you have to come to the environments, right? And then you have to click on your Launch Switch. So it will detect all the environments over here, right? And then what you can do is that you can go to the site on which this property has been installed. So if you go to the prod of this particular property, right, then over there you will get the option. If you click on Launch Switch, then you will get the option to toggle between debug, and you will get the option to choose the environment as well. So if you are on the prod side but you choose the environment as a development, then you will see all the changes that you have made in your dev library which have not been published, right? So I think I should also show you the publishing flow right now. It's a good moment to do that. So the publishing flow in Adobe Launch is very different as compared to Google Tag Manager. So here what you have to do is whenever you make any changes, okay, so let's say that you create a rule, okay, and after creating a rule you have to create a library, right? So you will get the option to add a library. So let's just call it test, okay, and then you have to associate an environment with that library. So if I'm creating test as a library, I have to choose that whether I want to associate it with dev, UAT or production, right? And then you have to click on add all change resources. So whatever rules and all that you do, once you click over here, those particular resources would get mapped to this library. So all the changes that you did, you can keep on making the changes, and finally when you come to this step in the publishing flow and you click on add all change resources, so all the changes would get mapped to this particular library, and then you have to click on save and build for development, right? So this particular library would get developed for you. Now when you go to your environments, now when you go to your publishing flow again, right, so you will see all the libraries and you will see these stages that they are in development, they have been submitted, they have been approved, and they have been published. Now each of these stages is controlled by different people with different accesses, different rights. So someone who is super admin can do all these things. Someone who is just a developer would have the access to develop it. He would have the access to, or she would have the access to develop and submit it. But someone who is having a higher access would be able to approve it. Okay, so that's also a good setup over here. So here you can control that how you can publish and change the flow. So that feature exists in Google Tag Manager as well, but I think the way they have created it in a visual manner over here, so that gives you a proper feedback on what's going on, whatever actions you are taking, how it's moving further, right? So if you have created a library that has been built, then you click on build for development and submit for approval, and eventually you will reach a stage where you can publish this, right? So what you can do over here, so coming back to the Launch Switch, so when you go to a site which has been enabled with Adobe Launch, and you have come to the environment for that particular site in Adobe Launch, and you have clicked on Launch Script, and those environments have been mapped to Launch, what you can do over here, if you go to the site, then you will see two options, which is debug, and the other one is choose environment. So you can choose, for example, development. So whatever is present in this library which is in development will replace the library which is on production for your machine only. So whatever changes you have done which are still in development and not been produced, you can see those changes on the site, right? So this is something which is very different when it comes to Google Tag Manager. So what we learned further, simple publishing flow in Google Tag Manager, while in Adobe Launch there is a sophisticated publishing flow with the requirement to create libraries and approving them across the dev, stage and prod phases. Okay. And there is a native debugger in Google Tag Manager which is called the Tag Assistant, while in Adobe Launch you need to use the Launch Switch browser extension, which is available in Google Chrome. I think it's available in Firefox as well. I'm not aware of the other browsers though. And the other thing which I cannot display as such because of the privacy reasons, right? But all elements, be it variables, triggers, tags, data layer updates, are visible in the Tag Assistant, so that you can see yourself. But debugging is done in the browser console in with limited features as compared to Tag Assistant when it comes to Adobe Launch. So you will not see on the fly everything. So and it is not directly possible. If you want to see these things on the fly, then you have to create dedicated codes within Adobe Launch to see such things, and you will have to do it separately for each of the elements, right? But it's very much convenient to do that in Tag Assistant. That's why I mentioned previously as well that I love Google Tag Assistant, right? So the debugging is relatively complicated to debug compared to the Tag Assistant in Adobe Launch. But having said that, it does not stop you from achieving what you want to do, and it does not stop you from using this powerful product as well. The next difference that I'm going to cover over here is a very important feature, and that is how the data layer gets updated in Google Tag Manager versus Adobe Launch. Now here as well, I personally feel that the way it gets updated in Google Tag Manager is really remarkable and very powerful, and this one gets updated by default. It's not very complicated to do that in Google Tag Manager. It is possible to do that in Adobe Launch as well, but it is something that is not out of box. It is not something that you can do within few clicks. You will need some kind of custom implementation for this. Okay, so let me elaborate upon what I am trying to say over here with data layer updates, and we will look at web application for this, because data layer updates are very critical when it comes to web applications when we want to track different kinds of interactions. Okay, so here I am on a web application, right? So if you just type over here data layer, and this is the data layer object that has been created by Google Tag Manager. You can go to any site where Google Tag Manager has been implemented and just look for this. So it is not something that is very private information. It's a publicly available information, right? So this one will show you all the objects that have been updated in data layer. So let's do this thing. I'll just randomly click somewhere. Okay, now right now you can see that there are 9 objects, but if I do this again, so you see that it will get updated based on my click. You see that this GTM click has been updated, and the other thing is that this GTM click has updated the GTM.element. Right now GTM.element is the element that was clicked by me in this particular event. So if I simply call this one data layer 11, because 11 is the one that got updated with click, and just do this, right, and further expand this, you will see this GTM.element. Now this has a lot of powerful information which advanced users can leverage, right? So let me give another example. So here, if I click on this plus sign, then by default in the debugger I do not expect the data layer to hold the information regarding the add to list or any other data that is getting pushed along with this. But if I will open this GTM element, then a lot of information gets exposed, right? So this is a very advanced use case, but something like this is not very easy to do in Adobe Launch, right? So I can look for the attributes, and not only that, I can look for the first child, the last child, the various kinds of other elements that might be possible, and I can pick certain information which is not readily exposed for us, right? So it's a very powerful tool, and once you become an advanced level user of Google Tag Manager or in general Tag Manager, you would come to appreciate the beauty of this thing, that how easily it is to fetch certain values from this particular option that we have, which is mostly available only with Google Tag Manager, right? It is not available in Adobe Launch. So after opening this multiple times, I have found an element which contains this text, right, added to list. Now if I want to set a click trigger such that it fires only when this particular element contains added to list, right, I can very easily do that. I can just right click on it. I can copy the property path. If I paste this property path that I had copied from here after data layer.12, then you can see that added.list gets populated over here. Now I can use this entire structure to create a variable in Google Tag Manager and pass this in my marketing and analytics pixels. Now again, this is a complicated use case, but it's a very powerful use case, and advanced levels users would use this a lot. Now something like this is not that readily possible in Adobe Launch. So the digital data, or that is by default the object that is used for Adobe Launch, it does not get updated with every click event like the way it is getting updated for data layer. So that is another difference that you need to be aware of. Now it's an advanced level use case, but it is something that you need to be aware of. Now this is one of the final things that I want to cover in this topic in GTM versus Launch, and that is custom events in Google Tag Manager, which are called direct call rules in Adobe Launch. Okay, now those who are familiar with the concept of custom events, so custom event is nothing but wherein we find it difficult to track something with the tag manager itself using the CSS or JavaScript. So we can request the developers to update an event in the data layer, and when that happen, it triggers the Google Tag Manager to do something, right? So if a custom event is detected by Google Tag Manager that is passed from the developer's end, okay, we do not use JavaScript and CSS for that, then we can fire pixels to analytics and marketing. Now something similar exists in Adobe Launch, right, which is called a direct call rule, and essentially it uses a function. So let me show you what that function is and how is that different in Adobe Launch versus Google Tag Manager. Now before explaining custom events in Adobe Launch, I want you to understand a very important concept of Adobe Launch, that is the satellite object. So if you go to any website that has been implemented with Adobe Launch, now until and unless they have explicitly changed the name of this object, if you go to the site and type _satellite in the console and just press enter, so it will populate the satellite object for you. Okay, so satellite object contains plenty of critical information that is required for the functioning of Adobe Launch. So if you expand it, you can just go through it. What are those? So at a high level, you can see that it contains the build info, which is the library build date. Okay, so what I can see was that there was something published on this particular site on 28th of October around 3:43 p.m. right? It contains the Adobe Analytics org ID, it contains the cookie values, it contains data elements, which are the variables in Adobe Launch, and it contains plenty of other information, right? Now let me show you something which is interesting. I'm digressing a bit, but I want to show this. So if you do _satellite dot set debug, okay, and you set it to true, right? Now if you filter for fired in console and if you refresh it, now on any website you can see the rules of Adobe Launch, right? So on this particular website, when the page loads, these rules are firing. So workday provider, they must have defined some kind of rule: all pages load target, page name fired. So these are the rules that have been set in Adobe Launch that has been implemented on this particular site. So this is also one of the ways through which you can debug the site. Now coming back to the direct call rule. So the how you define a direct call rule. So there is a syntax that we need to follow, and to define the direct call rule, we need to do _satellite dot track, right? And we need to pass a name of an identifier. So I can call it anything. Okay, so let's call it Data Vinci, right? So if I request the developers that on certain events just fire this function. So for example, I can request the developer that when a user is clicking on sign me up, then the developer should pass this function _satellite dot track Data Vinci, right? Now what would happen, that now I can use this identifier of DaVinci and create a rule based on this identifier, based on the direct call rule, to do something. Just like we can create something based on custom events, we can create something on the basis of this identifier. Okay, now here DaVinci is equivalent to an event name in Google Tag Manager. Okay, so I'll show you in Adobe Launch. So we are in Adobe Launch, and when you click on add rule, right, so when you click on your extension, which is usually core, and the event type, so here you can select a lot of things as we have discussed earlier as well, like page top, page bottom, click, etc. Now if you scroll below, then you will see something called a direct call. Okay, now as soon as you choose this call, you will get the option to put the identifier, and here is where we can put DaVinci. Now whenever DaVinci is detected in _satellite.track, right, then we can add what we want to do. So we can do something with Adobe Analytics, we can do something with Google Analytics, or we can just pass a custom script, right? So this is how we can create a direct call rule in Adobe Launch. Now earlier in the dynamic tag manager, so the direct call rule was not capable of passing extra parameters other than the identifier string, but with Adobe Launch, right, that thing has been resolved, and you can pass certain extra parameters in the direct call rule as well. Now I will not cover those things in detail. That requires a separate video altogether, which I would be making. So but for now, just understand this thing, that what is called as custom events in Google Tag Manager is a direct call rule in Adobe Launch. Alright, now I understand that for some of you this video can be a bit advanced, right, and a bit complicated, but if you have access to both Google Tag Manager and you have access to Adobe Launch, and if you follow through this video and try to explore those concepts which I have explained in this video in the site as well as the Tag Manager as well, then I think you should be good enough to start with the tool, right? I have tried to cover at least the basic stuff, right? Obviously in a small video we cannot cover everything, and in terms of detailing I am creating separate videos on each of the topics, but as a basic comparison to help you understand what the similarities between one tool and the other, I think this video should help you. Alright, so I'll still suggest that let's do a quick revision. So again, what did we discuss? That containers in Google Tag Manager are properties in Adobe Launch. Variables in Google Tag Manager are data elements in Adobe Launch. Rules in Adobe Launch include both the triggers and the tags in Google Tag Manager, except the custom JavaScript based tags or custom HTML based tags. You first need to install the extensions in Adobe Launch to create their respective rules. This is applicable even for Adobe tools like Adobe Audience Manager, Adobe Analytics, or Adobe Target, right? In Google Tag Manager, one trigger can be mapped to multiple tags. In Adobe Launch, one rule can have multiple actions within it with same trigger. Alright, in Google Tag Manager you set the order of each tag separately using advanced settings in the tags. In Adobe Launch you can just create a sequence of those actions in a rule, right? There are no separate installation tags within a container for different sites like prod dev in Google Tag Manager, but there are separate tags within a property in Adobe Launch for different environments. Both the tags in Google Tag Manager and Adobe Launch, they both need to be put in the head tag, so this is something common. There are two installation scripts in Google Tag Manager, and in Adobe Launch there is just one script tag. In Google Tag Manager there is a simple publishing flow, and in Adobe Launch there is a sophisticated publishing flow with the requirement to create libraries and approving them across dev stage and prod stages, right? There is a native debugger in Google Tag Manager, which as I mentioned that I love, and you need to use the Launch Switch browser extension, which is available at least in Google Chrome in the apps in the web store, and from there you can get the extension. All the elements, be it variables, triggers, tags, data layer updates, are visible in Tag Assistant, which is Google Tag Manager's debugger. Debugging is done in the browser console with limited features as compared to Tag Assistant, and it's relatively complicated to debug compared to the Tag Assistant in Adobe Launch. Data layer updates in Google Tag Manager versus Launch. So the data layer gets updated with every interaction, and it's relatively convenient to update, and it is slightly complicated in Adobe Launch. All right. Custom events in Google Tag Manager are called direct call rules in Adobe Launch. We saw how to create a basic direct call rule, right? So I would like to conclude this video here. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any feedback, just put them in the comment section below. Till then, I wish you well.